Music theory with OneNote. Negative modal distance versus inverse intervals, looking at the major modes, that including the Ionian mode, which is the major scale, the Lydian mode, and the Mixolydian mode. So get ready and some coffee, because although we're just playing with one note, it's a beautiful note. Not required to, but if you have access to it and would like to follow along, we're currently in the OneNote file of Modal Node System, MNS Presentation 1233, OneNote, negative modal distance versus inverse intervals, major modes, the list of the presentations on the right. We plan on adding plenty more to them shortly. Also noting, in this OneNote presentation, we're going to spend all of our time on the music theory side of things, but we have a similarly numbered and named presentation where we actually build the tables in Excel, practicing music, Excel, and table visualization at the same time. We're going to be continuing our discussion of distance, looking at intervals, in particular addressing the problem of going in the counterclockwise direction, the negative direction, looking at an option that actually makes more sense. So to get an idea of that, let's recap our visualization that we want to have in our mind. What are we trying to do here? Navigate the fretboard. What do we need in order to navigate the fretboard? We need directionality as well as distance terminology. Why? Because the best way to visualize the fretboard is as a map of the territory, like the globe, having 7 continent type locations and 5 other locations which are non-continent locations, like the oceans. We go through them to get to the continent type of locations. Our head is above the fretboard, like being in space, above this low or heavy E string, the one closest to the ceiling. As we look down on the fretboard, we notice that it can spin around like the Earth can, providing 12 degrees of rotation. We're going to be naming those with the 12 notes in the musical alphabet, typically working in the 4th degree of rotation, that being the C major and related collection of 7 notes. Noting we could work in C sharp, D, D sharp, and so on and so forth. The whole thing would just shift up. Therefore, once we've decided on the collection of notes, the 1 through 12, we no longer want to list things out by the note name, but by the permanent continent names, which is equivalent to the Nashville number systems, if you're familiar with that system, which is basically just giving a number to the modes, meaning the 1 is the Ionian, the 4 is the Lydian, the 6 is the Aeolian, the 5 is the Mixolydian, and so on and so forth. Now, if we visualize this on one string, we can imagine that string goes up and down like a number line, infinitely up and infinitely back. But at the same time, if we were to wrap that string around in a circle, we can also imagine that there is repetition, 12 notes, and then it repeats from an octave perspective. We're not going to get into the idea of octaves going up and down in an infinitely distance perspective. We'll talk more about that later. Right now, we're still visualizing it as basically a track. You can go around the NASCAR track, around and around in a circle. We can't go across the middle of the circle. And in NASCAR, you can only go one way, right, around the circle. But here, we can go directionally backwards. So if I'm moving around on the guitar, if you think about one string, I can go upwards, I can go backwards, I can also go physically upwards in space, but that's going to another string above it. That's actually going down in pitch. So that's still, from a tonal standpoint, is directional. I'm going up or I'm going back. So we imagine we go around in a circle here. If I'm on this number 3 continent, then, and I want to get to like this 7, how far away is that? I can count continents, 1, 2, 3, 4. That's 4 continents away, which I would call 4 modal half steps away. If I make this the 1, we can use scale degrees. That's now not a 3, it's a 1. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It would be the 5th scale degree. I could also add the oceans. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 away, including the oceans. That would be like going how many notes away. Now, I can also go backwards, however. So I could go 1, 2, 3 backwards, that would be -3 modal half steps, which you would expect to be, if I made that the 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, -4th scale degree. Some people do use negative scale degrees, but it doesn't make complete sense because it's not actually symmetrical. So as we discussed in prior presentations, it's more likely that you want to be thinking about going backwards if using the normal convention terminology by adding the notes. Meaning if I go from here to here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that would be a 5-note away, which we typically call a perfect fourth because it would be 1, 2, 3, 4 scale degrees, or 1, 2, 3 modal half steps up. But if I go from here back to here, I can clearly see that that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, -5 notes back, or 1, 2, 3, -3 modal half steps back, or if I make that the 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, -4 scale degree back. But we don't usually say -4 scale degrees. Instead, we take the inverse distance, which is going to be 5 minus 12, which is 7. So even though I'm going back 5, I call it a 7-note away, and I would call it a -7-note away, and then call it a perfect fifth. Because normally we think about going clockwise, 5, 6, 7. Now that works. You can use that terminology, but notice it doesn't really make a lot of sense because the second term doesn't tell you anything about the scale degree term is wrong because you would think it would be going in the negative direction on the scale degrees. That's just how it is because of the misconception, in my opinion, of the measuring. So now we're going to think about, well, what would it be like if we had a system that would be completely logical? If it was totally logical, I should be able to measure going forward and going backwards in a way that I can see the directionality. If I go so many steps around the circle this way, and there's 7 steps, I can take 7 minus that to determine how many I go around the other way, whether I'm talking about the 12 notes equivalent to the continents and the oceans, or talking about the continent locations, which are equivalent to the modal half steps. So let me show you what I mean. So in prior presentations, we took a look at the fact that we have 12 notes. We pick out 7 of those notes using our formula. We're starting on the C here, whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. That gives us our 7 notes. We're working in the key of C all the time, but remember, we can copy and paste this to any of the 12 collection of 7 notes, and the distances will all remain the same because it's just like the planet rotating around to 12 degrees. 12 different degrees. They also, the distance between the continents and the oceans and whatnot are all the same once you determine what degree you're looking at. So we then thought that normally we go forward. If you're just going forward within 1 octave, like a NASCAR track, going clockwise around the track, you've only got 11 different ways that you can view 11 different intervals that you have, distances from any one point. You can measure 11 different distances, right? And we named those based on the major scale. The problem with the measurement, if we take like the major third over here, is that usually they drop the notes, which is the distance that is the most important, which I would recommend adding back. And if you add it back, the middle term, the M in this case, becomes basically irrelevant, because I'd rather know that it's in the major scale, meaning if I start from an Ionian node and go 4 notes up, I land on a continent and not in the ocean, not because there's an M here, but because I went 4 notes up. I would also like that to be the thing that triggers in my mind the quality of what the tone is going to be, not the fact that there's an M next to it. And the third here we can see also is a scale degree, which from a measurement standpoint is off by 1, because we should be measuring from this point, if you're starting from here, not including that as one of the measurement nodes. Why? Because when we go backwards, it causes a problem. So we in a prior presentation said, well, what if I go from the 0 backwards? Well, then what happens is you get a -1 step backwards. But what am I going to call it in terms of the interval? Well, I would recommend keep calling it a major 7, even though the major 7 doesn't make sense. You would think it would be a -2nd something, right? So, but you're going to keep it as a major 7. How do I know it's a major 7? Because I'm going to take 12 minus the 1 backwards would be 11 forwards. Therefore, I'm going to say the major 7 could either be 11 forward or 1 backwards. Problem with that is that the 7th scale degree doesn't make any sense in this context. It's just, you just memorize it. That's just the tag we have for that distance. What would be a better system? It would be something like this, right? We would say, okay, if I'm going, let's do it this way. I got to go from the bottom. I'm going 1 step back. So I'm starting at 0, meaning I'm not going anywhere. If I look at it from this perspective of the Ionian, it would be a 0 node away, 0 modal half step. And then instead of going forward or clockwise, we go counterclockwise. So that means we would take 1 step back. So if I was on the Ionian and I go 1 modal step back, we get to the Locrian. If I was on the Ionian and I go 1 note step back, I once again get to the Locrian. I land on a continent. Remember, if I go 1 step forward, I don't land on a continent. If I go 1 note forward, I land in the ocean. But if I go 1 note backwards, I land on the continent. So distance makes a difference. I mean, directionality makes a difference, right? It's not going to be the same going backwards as forwards, obviously, because it's not totally. So we're going to say then that would be an IN modal range. So I'm still going to call that an IN modal range. I'm not going to now call it an NI modal range because I'm perceiving myself moving counterclockwise from the I to the N, not from the N to the I, even though I'm going down or counterclockwise pitchwise. So I'm still going to call it an IN modal range, which would be a 1-7 modal range, recognizing that there's 2 directionalities I could have in a similar way as I would propose you see the intervals like a major 7 being able to go forward 11 and backwards 1. Would be more logical to name the 2 points and say, how do I get from the Ionian to the Locrian continents? Well, we don't need to turn left, turn right, or anything because we can only go clockwise or counterclockwise around the loop. So either you're going to go forwards 11 or you go backwards 1. So the easiest way would go from the I back to the N or the 7, the 1 back to the 7 because there's only 7 of the locations. So it would be a -1 Ionian first modal half step. I'm imagining that negative is flowing all the way through so that we don't have to put 2 negatives. So that 1 here is also a -1. -1 from the Ionian node, negative first modal half step, which would be the -2nd scale degree, which some people use, but we don't have a -2nd scale degree because, again, the scale degrees fall apart when you go backwards. Therefore, we're going to keep the terminology -1 major 7, which is obviously quite weird. This one makes sense because if I take the inverse, or if I go around clockwise, it would be 12 minus 1 would be 11, and 7 minus 1 would be 6. So going the other way, we would have then an 11 node away from the Ionian 6th modal half step, which would be the 7th scale degree, right? Which would be this one. So this makes sense because now if I'm on the Ionian, I can say, okay, I can either go 1 back, which would take me to here, or I can go 11 forward, which would be 5, 10, 11, because there's 5 notes between the strings, which would take me here. And I can also see that in terms of the nodes, right? I can go 1 modal half step back, or I can go 6 forward. Let's start from this C, 1, 2, 3, let's start from this C, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? So this obviously is, consistent. Would be a better method if we could, you might want to shoehorn it into the thought process, right? So then if I go back, let's say we go back to the next one. Now I'm going to start with the ones that are in the key again of the Ionian, and then we'll look at the other ones as well. So if we went 3 back, so we take 3 back steps in the counterclockwise direction. So normally we could call that a -3, and then we'd have to say what's the inverse of that. It would be 12 minus 3, which is 9. 9 is a major 6. Therefore, the major 6 could go forward 9 or backwards 3. it would be better to say, well, if I go back 3, then it would be an IA modal range, because if I'm on the I, if I go here and I'm on the Ionian and I go back 3, 1, 3, 1, 2, 3, I would go here. So I'm still going to call it an IA modal range, even though it's going pitchwise A to I, because I'm thinking of myself directionally going from the I back to the A from whatever context I'm looking at. So it's going to be a 1/6 modal range, and instead of going 1 up to 6, I'm going 1 back to 7 and then to 6 backwards. So that would be a -3 distance from the Ionian node, which would be a -2nd modal half step, which would be a -3rd scale degree if we talked about scale degrees going negative, but we don't, or normally most people don't. So that's why I would keep this terminology, but this one's more consistent. Why? Because then if I go forward, 12 minus 3 is 9, and then 7 minus 2 would be 5. So it would be a 9 node away Ionian 5th modal half step, which would be the 6th scale degree. So that makes sense because I can see it as going backwards in terms of notes, as well as backwards in terms of modal half steps, and then I can see the other side going forward in both ways as well. All right, let's do the next one. Hold on a second. So let's do the next one that's in the key. So I'm going to go up to this one and say, okay, what if we go back 5? I'm going to go back 5 from the Ionian node. I'm going to we're always imagining myself from this point as measuring from the Ionian. So we're going to go say I'm on the Ionian and I'm going to go back 5. So now we're going to say from here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So now we get back to here. So I would still call that then an IX. So we're going from I to X, and that would be a 1, 5. We could go forward 1, 2 to 5, or go backwards 1, 7, 6, 5. What's the distance if I go counterclockwise? It's a -5 distance from the Ionian node, which is a -3rd modal half step, which would be a -4th scale degree if we were using scale degrees, but we're not. We have to only be able to use this half, the -5, and then kind of tack on this in the current system, right? But this way, we can see what would be the inverse. It would make sense because 12 minus 5 would be 7, and 7 minus 3, 7, 6, 5, 4. So it would be a 7 node away from the Ionian node, 4th modal half step, which would be the 5th scale degree, right? So I can see it going backwards in terms of notes, and I can see the other side if I was to go clockwise by doing simple math, which obviously just makes sense. So now let's do the next one. Let's say we go up to the next one that's in the key. So we're going back now 7 back. So if I go 7 back, then I'm going to start. So I have room 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So we'd go from here to here. I would call that once again an IY modal range. An IY modal range could be going forwards or backwards. This time we're going backwards. To go backwards, it would be -7 from the Ionian node, which would be the -4th modal half step backwards, which would be the -5th scale degree if we had negative scale degrees, but we typically don't. The inverse would be 12 minus 7, or 5, and then 7 minus 4, which would be 3, right? So we have a 5 node away Ionian third. So if I'm on this C, I could go back 7 or back 4, 1, 2, 3, 4 modal half steps, or I could go forward, then I can go forward 5, would be 5, and I could go forward, I got messed up. I could go forward, where was I? 5 node, 3 steps. Now I'm trying to figure out how it would be. It would be going to the Y, so it would be 1, 2, and then down here to the 3. So you can kind of see that it's kind of hard to wrap it around, because then we have to know the distances between the strings. But you can see how we can count that out. All right, let's go up to the next one that's in the key. So if we're going to go up to the next one, We're going to say this is an IP range, so we're going to go back 8. So if we go back 8, can I go back 8 from here? We can, I think. So that would be going back 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 would be going to here. And so if we went back 8, would be going from an Ionian to the Phrygian. So we can call that an IP modal range, a 1,3 modal range. And the distance then is going to be a -8 Ionian -5th modal half step, which we don't have over here. So we would just call it a -8. And I would have to say the inverse would be 12 minus 8, which would be 4, which would be a major third. Therefore, I would think of the major third as going forward 4 or backwards 8. But this makes more sense because if I go 8 forward, then it would 8 backwards, it would be 4 forward. And I can also, this second number still makes sense because if I go back 5, I could also go 7 minus 5 forward 2. So it would be here a 4 note away Ionian second modal half step, which would be the third scale degree. So you can see I can go backwards or I can go forwards 4, 1, 2, 3, 4 to get here. And that would be 1, 2 modal half steps forward. All right, so then I could clear this out. Let's see if I can do this one this time. Well, that's not the eraser button. Oh, there we go. Eraser button. All right, let's do the next one. And so we're going to go, okay, so the next one is going to be here that's in the key. So we're going to say back 10. If I go back 10, then let's bring this down here. And let's say we go from this C back. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I would be going back to here. So it'd be a ID modal range. So we're going to do an ID, and it would be a -10 from the Ionian node, -6th modal half step, which you would think would be a -7th scale degree, but we don't have scale degrees. So what do we call it instead? We'd have to say, well, if I go back 10, then that would be 12 minus 10, forward 2. Forward 2 is called a major second. Therefore, the major second could either be going forward 2 or back 10. But obviously, this makes more sense because I can say if I go back 10, I go forward 2, and if I go back 6, it would be 7 minus 6, it would be forward 1. So that would be a 2 note away Ionian first modal half step, which of course would be the second scale degree. So I can see myself going backwards, and I can also see it going forwards, which would be 2 notes away to here, or 1 modal half step forward, which would be the second scale degree if I made that the 1. All right, let's go ahead and erase this. And now let's go and say, all right, let's do the ones that are in the middle for the Ionian. So if we're in the Ionian, if we're measuring from the Ionian node and I go back 2, what's that going to do? It's going to land me in the ocean. So that's going to be, I could call it an I to an N minus, meaning I'm going right just past or just past the N, or short of the, it's the 7 minus a 1 to a 6.5. So the directionality is a little bit wonky because we have that whole issue again where I could say it's a plus or a minus. So the numbers actually make a little bit more sense, right? It's a 1, or it's a little bit more clear, but it's a 1 to a 6.5, meaning we're going to be in the ocean, and that's going to be in between the 6 node and the 7 node. So it'd be minus a 0.5 or plus a 0.5. The distance would be -2 from the Ionian node, 1.5. So if I was on the Ionian node here and I go -2 back, lands me in the ocean, right? So it lands me in the ocean, and we can still take the reverse of that. Notice that you would think that this would be a -3.5 scale degree, but we don't have scale degrees. And even when we do have scale degrees going forward, they get wonky because they're based only on the major scale, and really the minor means a 0.5 from the perspective of the major scale, right? So this actually still kind of makes sense because I can take the inverse of that, which would be 12 minus 2, which would be a 10 node away from the Ionian node, and then 7 minus 1.5 would be the 5.5. So I can see it then going forward. It would be going forward then 10 from the 4. Let's see if I was over here and I go forward 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Lands me in the ocean. And we can see from a modal standpoint, it would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.5. Lands me in the ocean. All right, let's go ahead and get rid of that one. Let's do the next one. We're gonna have to do this a little faster because we're running. This is taking too long. You're pulling too much time, man. You're breaking your own rules. Let's say we go from to a -4. If I go a -4 from the perspective of the Ionian, it would be going to an I to an I minus. So we're going to go to an I from a 1 to a 5.5, not quite making it to the 6. An IA minus, not quite making it to the Aeolian. So that would be a distance of a -4 from the Ionian node, and it would be a -2.5 from the Ionian node, which you would think would be a -3.5 scale degree, but we don't have scale degrees. From this distance standpoint over here, it would be a -4, right? And I would have to say, well, what would be the inverse? 12 minus 4 is 8, so an 8 is a -6. So we'd have to say then the -6 could be going forward 8 or backwards 4. But this is going to be more consistent because I can say, all right, if I'm on the Ionian and I go back 4, 1, 2, 3, 4 lands me in the ocean, and I can see that as -1, 2.5 going backwards. If I go back 4, I can go forward then 12 minus 4, which is 8. And I can go 7 minus 2.5, which is 4.5. So if I go forward, let's go from like here, and I go forward 8, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, lands me in the ocean, which would also be 4.5. 1, 2, 3, 4.5 forward from a modal half-step perspective. All right, let's erase that. Get in a rhythm here. I think I'm getting in a rhythm. Gotta go faster, faster. All right, I'm going faster. Got to get stuff done. We're going to go back 6. So if I go back 6 then, so if I'm on from the perspective of the Ionian and I go back 6, it would be then a Ionian to the X negative, which would be a 1 to a 4.5. Because if I go back 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we're just past, we're in the ocean between the Lydian and the Mixolydian. I'm going to call that the Lydian Ocean. The Lydian's always to the right of it. We'll call it the Lydian Ocean. So we're on the Lydian Ocean, and so if I think about that on this side, we would say it's a -6. What's the inverse? 12 minus 6 is still 6. We call that a diminished fifth. So I can also say it's a negative diminished fifth. Either I go forward 6 or back 6. It's still going to be the diminished fifth. Okay, here it makes more 6. 6 minus 6 would be 6, and 3.5 minus 6 would be 3.5. So I can go I can go from this C, go 6 forward. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lands me in the Lydian Ocean this way, and it's 3.5, 1, 2, 3.5 modal half steps forward. All right, makes perfect sense. Makes perfect sense. Let's do the next one. We're going to go up to this one. So what if I went back 9? So if I go back 9 from an Ionian node, let's say we're going here, so I have room. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 lands me in what I'm going to call the Dorian Ocean. So that's fine. And it would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5.5 steps back. So that would be an IP minus modal range, a 1 to a 2.5 modal range. That would be -9 back from the Ionian node, which would be -5.5 distance. If I counted it this way, it would be -9. It would be a -9. So 12 minus 9 would be 3, which I know is a minor third. Therefore, the minor third could be 3 forward or -9 backwards. This makes more sense because I can say the inverse of a -9 Ionian 5, -5, 5 would be 9, 3 forward, a forward 3, 12 minus 9 is 3, Ionian, and then a 1.5 modal half steps forward. So in other words, if I was here, I can go 3 forward, 1, 2, 3, lands me in the Dorian Ocean, which is 1.5 modal half steps forward. All right, in the Dorian Ocean. Okay, so let's go up to the last one. So we're going to say 11 back. So if I go 11 back from an Ionian, so can I go, like, do I have one that's far enough up? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Not quite, right? So let's go down here. There's be -5. So I'm going to go backwards. This is going to be -5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Okay, so that brings me to, I'm going to call it the Ionian Ocean, right? So now we're in the Ionian Ocean, and all right, so that's going to be an ID negative modal range, a 1 to a 1.5 modal range. The distance is a -11 from the Ionian node, which is going to be a -6.5 modal half steps back, which you would think would be a -7.5 scale degree, but we don't have scale degrees. The inverse would be 12 minus 11, which would be a 1 note away from the Ionian node and a 0.5 distance. So if I was going this way then to land in the Ionian Ocean, obviously I only need to go 1 step forward note-wise, which would be a half a step from the standpoint of a modal half step. All right, so let's go ahead and let's do another one. So we're going to compare the modes to the next mode, which will be the Lydian mode, which will be similar again to the major key. So these are going to be the more similar modes. So if I go -1 backwards, I'm going to go -1 backwards, -1 backwards. Okay, so from the Lydian. So if I'm on the Lydian, let's pick a Lydian here, right here, and I go -1 backwards. Here we are. We're going from a Y to a P. So it's a YP modal range. And we're going to say that that's going to be a 4-3 modal range. I could go forward to the 3, meaning 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, or backwards 4 minus 1 to 3. That's going to be a -1 Y Lydian from the Lydian mode, negative first modal half step backwards, which you would think would be the -2nd scale degree, but we don't have the second over here. Notice here the M isn't giving us any information. Here, the Y is just telling us where we are measuring from. If you don't know that, you could just call it a -1 first modal half step backwards, right? You could just call it that if you don't know the name of the Lydian. But anyways, that's going to be the idea. Now, the inverse then would be 12 minus 1, which would be 11 note away from the Lydian 6 modal half step forward, which would be the 7th scale degree. So that means if I was on the Lydian, like over here, let's find a Lydian on this side, and I went 11 forward, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. There we are there, and that would be 6 modal half steps, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, which would be the 7th scale degree if I made that the 1. 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 7. Okay, let's erase that. Erase that. All right. Erase that, please. I've had enough of that on there. Let's say we go to the next one, a -3. So if I go -3 back, then let's say we go from the Lydian -3. So let's say we pick out a Lydian here. Let's make this one 1, 2, 3. Lands us on the Dorian node. So I'm going to call it a YD range, even though we're going backwards, a YD modal range, which would be a 4-2 modal range. What's the distance? If I go counterclockwise, it would be a -3 from the Lydian mode, -2nd modal half step, which you would think would be the 3rd scale degree, but we don't have 3rd scale degrees, so normally I'd have to say -3, 12 minus 3 is 9, 9 is a major 6, therefore the major 6 could be going forward 9 or -3 back. But this makes more sense, because if I say it's a -3 from the Lydian mode, -2, that would be a positive 9 from the Lydian mode, and then 7 minus 2 would be 5 steps forward. So in other words, if I was on the Lydian mode over here, Let's pick this one. And we can go forward 9. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Lands me on the Dorian. Or I can go 5 steps forward, which is going to be 5 modal half steps. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which you would think would be the 6th scale degree if I made that the 1. All right, let's just get rid of this one and this one. I'll try to keep these other 2 this time. All right, let's do the next one. So let's say we go up to the next one that's within a continent, we hit a continent with. So we're going to go a -5. So if I go -5 from Validian, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and we can see it would be -1, 2, 3, the -3rd modal half step back, which would be the -4th scale degree if we had scale degrees, but we don't. So what do we have to do instead? We'd have to say, well, if it's -5 backwards, 12 minus 5 would be 7 forward. And just know that 7 forward means a perfect fifth. And therefore, the perfect fifth could either be going forward 7 or back 5. It would make more sense, however, to call it something like a YI modal range or a 4-1 modal range. If I go negative in that, or counterclockwise, it would be a -5 from the Lydian mode, -3rd modal half step. And then if I go forward, it would be a 7 note forward from the Lydian node, 4th modal half step, which would be the 5th scale degree. So in other words, if I was on that Lydian and I went 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 going forward, or it would be 1, 2, 3, 4th modal half step, which would be the 5th scale degree, as we can see here. All right, let's go to the next one. So I'm going to undo this. Why isn't it clicking that? It's not switching. It's not switching like it's supposed to. Okay. So let's go to this one and say we go up to the next one and say, all right, we're on the YN. So this is the weird one. So that's going to be then if I go back 6. So if I go back 6 then from this Lydian, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, it brings me here, which is -1, 2, 3, 4, -4th modal half step, which would be the -6th scale degree. -5th scale degree if we had scale degrees, but we don't. Instead, I'd have to say if it's a -5, 12 minus, -6, 12 minus 6 will be 6. So going forward or clockwise, it would be a 6 note away, diminished 5th or augmented 4th in our case here. And so we can then say that the other way would be 12 minus 6 would still be 6 and an either diminished 6 or an augmented 4th in this weird interval. But this makes more sense from the perspective of the Lydian because it's clear it would be a -6 from the Lydian, which would be a -4 modal half step backwards, and going the other way would be a +6 from the Lydian, and then 7 minus 4 would be a +3 modal half steps forward, which would be the 4th scale degree, which again it says 5 over here because that's from the perspective of normalcy or the Locrian mode. So that's that weird interval. So in other words, I could go forward 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? Wait a second. Could go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? Or that would be 1, 2, 3, 3rd modal half step forward, which would be the 4th scale degree. Okay, let's do the next one. That was a weird one. And so I'm going to do the next one. We're going to say we have, let's go to this one, let's just do it all the way up here. And so now we've got a 8 note away. So if it's 8 notes away from here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 brings me here, which is -1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the -5th modal half step, which would be the -6 scale degree if we had that, but we don't. What do we do instead? Well, -8 minus 12 would be 3 forward, which would be 8, 4 forward, which would be a major third. Therefore, a major third could be 4 forward or 8 backwards. It would be better to say it would be a YA modal range, a 4-6 modal range. The distance, if I go counterclockwise, would be a -8 from the Lydian mode, -5th modal half step. And that the inverse then, or if I went clockwise, would be a 4 note away, Lydian, 7 minus 5, 2 modal half steps forward, which would be the third scale degree. So if I was here, I could say we go forward 1, 2, 3, 4, and that would be, wait a sec, is that right? It would be 4 notes forward, and that would be 1, 2 modal half steps forward, which would be the third, 1, 2, 3, if I make that the 1. All right, next one. It won't click that. It doesn't do it when I click on it. All right, I'm going to complain to the Microsofts because they listen to me. Everybody listens to me. All right, I'm going to go up. I'm going to change music theory and fix Microsoft at the same time. So here we go. So what if we go back 10? What if I go back 10? Then it's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 back. And that would be negative 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, negative 6 modal half step, which would be the negative 7 scale degree if we had scale degrees, but we don't. What do we do? Negative 10 minus 12 would be 2 forward. 2 forward would be a major second. Therefore, the major second could be 2 forward or negative 10 backwards. Would be better to call it a YX modal range, a 4-5 modal range, or going counterclockwise, a negative 10 from the Lydian mode, which would be a negative 6 modal half step backwards, because the inverse would clearly then be 12 minus 10, 2 forward from the Lydian mode, 7 minus 6, 1 modal half step forward, which would be the second scale degree. So if I'm here, I can then say, okay, it would be 2 steps forward, 1, 2 would be here, which would be 1 modal half step forward. All right, let's erase this. Eraser. All right. Next one. Let's bring it down and do the ones that land us in the ocean. The ones that land us in the ocean. The troublesome ones. So we don't want to do that because people laugh at us when we play it, and it also makes us vulnerable to shark attack. But if we go back 2 steps, from the Lydian, what happens? We go back I'll tell you what happens. We land in the Dorian Ocean, because I'm going to name it by this side. It's the Dorian Ocean. All right. So we land in the ocean. So it would be, I would say that's negative 1.5 modal half steps back, which would be 2.5, you would think, scale degrees, but we don't have scale degrees. So we would typically say, well, if I go back 2, that would be like going forward 10, that would be a minor 7. Therefore, a minor 7 could be forward 10 or back 2. But I'd rather call it a YP negative modal range, or a 4 to a 2.5 modal range, which would be a negative 2 distance from the Lydian mode, or a negative 1.5 modal half step, which would be then going forward, would be like going forward 10 and forward 5.5 modal half steps, which you would think would be 6.5 scale degrees, but we of course have a 7 here because we don't have 0.5s because it's weird system. So we go up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, lands us in the Dorian Ocean, which would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5.5 modal half steps, which would be 6.5 scale degrees, which we don't have. We call it a minor 7. Okay, so let's close that out and let's do the next one. So now we're going to go up to this one. So negative 4 backwards. If we go negative 4 back, then I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, lands us in the Ionian Ocean. Lands us in the Ionian Ocean. So that would be negative 1, 2.5 modal half steps back. So what we normally would do is say, okay, it's back 4. So I'd have to say 12 minus 4 is 8. We know that 8 is a minor 6. Therefore, the minor 6 could be 8 forward or negative 4 backwards. But I'd rather call it a YD negative modal range, a 4 to a 1.5 modal range, which would be a negative 4 notes back from the Lydian mode, a negative 2.5 modal half steps back, because then if I go forward, I know that that's simply going to be an 8 note away from the Lydian mode, 4.5 modal half steps forward. So if I go 8, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, lands me in the Ionian Ocean, which is 1, 2, 3, 4.5 modal half steps forward, which you would think would be 5.5 scale degrees, but we don't have scale degrees. It would be some kind of 6 scale degree forward. Okay, next one. This is really taking more time than we have here. Okay, that's okay. Bear with me. There's a bear with me in it, but don't worry because it's a nice bear. It won't eat you. Bear with me. So we're going to go -7 back. -7 back. So now we're going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Lands me in the Aeolian Ocean. So that would be -1, 2, 3, 4.5 modal half steps back, which you would think would be 6.5 scale degrees back, but we don't have the scale degrees back. If I went 7 back, then that would be like going 12 minus 7, which would be 5 forward, which would be a perfect fourth. And so you can say the perfect fourth is 5 forward or 7 back, but I'd rather call it a YN negative modal range, a 4 to a 6.5 modal range, which has a -7 notes from the Lydian mode, -4.5 modal half steps back, because then if I go forward, it would clearly be and this is where it should be a 2.5, not a 2.2, but it would be a 5 note away Lydian, and it would be 7 minus 4.5, which would be a 2.5 modal half steps forward. So if I'm here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, lands me in the Aeolian Ocean, which is 1, 2.5, not 2.2 modal half steps forward, which you would think would be 3.5 scale degrees, but we don't have 3.5 scale degrees, so we're going to be at the 4 scale degrees. Okay. Let's do the next one. Otra vez. Why won't it erase that? Okay. Next one. We're going up. Will be here, -9. So what if we go -9? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Lands me in the Mixolydian Ocean. That would be -1, 2, 3, 4, 5.5 modal half steps back, which would be -6.5 scale degrees if we had scale degrees going backwards, but we don't, and we also don't have half steps going backwards or 0.5s going backwards. But what do we do instead? Well, if it's 9 back, 12 minus 9 would be 3 forward, which would be a minor third. So the minor third could be 3 forward or 9 back, but I'd rather call it a YA negative modal range, a 4 to a 4.5 modal range, which if I go counterclockwise to get from the Y to the A negative, that would be a -9 notes away from the Lydian mode, which would be a -5.5 modal half steps backwards. And then if I went forwards to go around it clockwise, 12 minus 9, as we saw, is going to be 3. 7 minus 5.5 is 1.5. So it'd be a 3 note away from the Lydian mode, 1.5 modal half steps forward, which you would think would be 2.5 scale degrees forward, but we don't have 0.5, so it's going to be a 3 scale degree forward. So from the Lydian here, we've got 1, 2, 3, lands me in the Mixolydian Ocean, which is 1.5 modal half steps forward, which you would think would be 2.5 scale degrees forward, but we don't have that, so it's rounded up to a minor third going forward. All right, let's do the next one. Eraser. When I click on you, Eraser, you need to get into action because you're not doing it right. All right. So what if I go back 11? So if I go back 11, so can I go 11? That's going to land me off the fretboard. So let's do it this way. There's 5 notes between the strings. So I'm going to go up, which would be a -5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Lands me in the Lydian Ocean, we're going to say. So normally I'd say if I go back 11, 12 minus 11 would be forward 1, which would be a minor second, just would have to know that. So if I have a minor second, I could go forward 1 or back 11. I'd rather call it a YX negative range, or like a 4 to a 4.5 range, which would have a distance in the counterclockwise direction of 11 notes back from the Lydian node, which would be a 6.5 modal half step backwards, because then if I go forwards, we can see that it's 1 step forward from the Lydian node, which is a 0.5 modal half step forward. So if I'm over here, I can say then it's going to be 1 note forward, landing me in the Lydian Ocean, which would be a 0.5 modal half step forward, which you would think would be a 1.5 scale degree forward, but we don't have scale degrees. That's why it's going to be a second or a 1 note away minor second. All right, let's try to do, I'm going to try to do the last majors here. That's going to be the Mixolydian. Let's say we're going from the Mixolydian this time. Let's pick our direction, our notes first. Try to do this, see if we learn anything, do this a little bit better. Let's go from this Mixolydian. That'll take me all the way across. So we have this Mixolydian going this way, and let's say when we go the other way, we'll try to use this Mixolydian. That one might not always be the best. Let's try that though. All right, so we're gonna say from the bottom, we're gonna go up from the Mixolydian node this time, and let's say we go up to here, the one that's gonna be in the key, and so we go back 2 this time. We have to go back 2 because this is the interval that is different if we want to land on a continent. So if I go back 2 from here, it's going to be 1, 2 to go back. Notice when I was on the Ionian, if I went back 2, I would land in an ocean, the Aeolian Ocean. I'd have to go back 1. So this is where the interval is different. So that's going to be that, and that's going to be 1 modal half step backwards, which you would think would be the negative second scale degree, but we don't have negative second scale degrees. Normally we would say if I go back 2, that would be like going forward 10, which I just have to know is a minor 7. Therefore, the minor 7 could be forward 10 or back 2, but I'd rather call it an XY modal range, which would be a 5-4 modal range, which has a distance in the counterclockwise direction of -2 from the Mixolydian mode, which would be a negative first modal half step, because then the inverse would be, or the counterclockwise direction would be a 10 note away from the Mixolydian mode. 7 minus 1 is 6 modal half steps forward, which would be the 7th scale degree. So in other words, if I'm here and I went 6 forward, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Wait a sec, I go 10 forward. Undo. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I can't quite. Well, I'll just do it from here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Why do I have it down here? This is the perfect one because I can just do it from here. Boom. And that would be going forward 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 modal half steps forward, which would be the 7th scale degree. Okay, I like that. So that's cool. So now I can just delete the one in the middle and go to the next one. This is perfect. This is the best. All right. So now we're going to go back to a -4 back. So if I start from here, -4, 1, 2, 3. Wait a sec. We're going back -3 back. So we're going back 1, 2, 3. Lands me here. So that would be a -1, 2 modal half steps backwards, which you would think would be a -3 scale degree, but we don't have scale degrees, so we would normally say we're going back 3. 12 minus 3 would be forward 9. That we just have to know is a major 6. So the major 6 could be 9 forward or -3 in the negative direction. I'd rather say it's an XP modal range, a 5-3 modal range. And if I go counterclockwise or in the negative direction, it would be -3 notes back from the Mixolydian mode, which would be a -2nd modal half step. And that means that if I go the other way, it would be 9. A 9 note forward from the Mixolydian mode clockwise, which would be 7 minus 2 or 5 modal half steps forward, which would be the 6th scale degree. So if I was on this side, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, which would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the 5th modal half step, which would be the 6th scale degree. All right, next one. Next one. We're not done yet. I didn't hear no bell, and I don't stop till I hear bells. Why? Because that's when food happens. That's why. That's how I've been trained. I've been trained by the best. And I don't stop till food happens, and that's when the bell goes off. Okay, so we're going to say, now let's say we go back -5. So -5 back, all right? So that's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we're going to go back here. That's going to be 1, 2, 3, -3 modal half steps back, which you would think would be -4 scale degrees if we had scale degrees, but we don't. What do we do instead? Well, -5, 12 minus 5 is 7 forward. That would be a perfect fifth. Therefore, a perfect fifth could be 7 forward or back 5. I'd rather call it an XD modal range, a 5-2 modal range, which if I'm going in the counterclockwise direction would be -5 notes from the Mixolydian node, which would be a -3rd modal half step backwards. And if I went clockwise then, 12 minus 5 would be 7, and 7 minus 3 would be 4. So going forward would be a 7 note away from the Mixolydian mode, 4th modal half step, which would be the 5th scale degree. So in other words, if I go forward, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, we get here. We go modal half steps, 1, 2, 3, 4th modal half step, which would be the 5th scale degree if I make that the 1. All right, let's do the next one. So we're going to go up to the next one and say, see, this is so easy, like it's like I can't believe that people don't do this, right? Look, this is clear as day, for crying out loud. So what if we go back? What if we go back 7? Then it's going to be here 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 back would take me to right here. Why isn't that working? 7 back takes me here. That's going to be -1, 2, 3, 4th modal half step back, which you would think would be the -5th scale degree if we had the scale degree thing going, but we don't. So we normally say -7, 12 minus 7 is 5. 5 distance is a perfect 4th. Therefore, the perfect 4th could be 5 forward or 7 backwards, but I'd rather say it's an XI modal range, a 5-1 modal range, which if I go in the counterclockwise direction is a 7 note distance from the Mixolydian mode, which is a -4th modal half step. Going forward then would be a 5 note forward from the Mixolydian mode. 4 minus 7 is 3, 3rd modal half step forward, which would be the 4th scale degree. So if I go 5 forward, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, there it is. If I go 1, 2, 3 modal half steps forward, there it is, which means it would be the 4th scale degree. Okay, let's do the next one. But boom. So now we're going to be on this one, and we're going to say that we're going to go back 9 back. So now 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Wait a second, that lands me in the ocean. 8 back. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 back. Lands me right there. That's going to be -1, 2, 3, 4, 5. -5 modal half steps back, which you would think would be -6 scale degrees, but we don't have scale degrees going backwards. What do we have instead? -9, 12 minus 9 would be +3. +3 I know is a minor third, therefore the minor third could be a +3 or a -9, but I'd rather say, but wait a sec, we're on -8. Going forward would be 12 minus 8, 4, which I know is a major third. So a major third could be 4 forward or -8 backwards, but I'd rather say it's an XN modal range, a 5-7 modal range, a -8 half steps from the Mixolydian mode, which would be a -5 modal half steps. Going forward, therefore, would be a 4 note away from the Mixolydian mode. 7 minus 5 would be the 2nd modal half step going forward, which would be the 3rd scale degree. So if I went forward 1, 2, 3, 4 steps, or 1, 2 modal half steps forward, which if I make that the 1 would be the 4th scale, the 3rd scale degree. Okay, let's do the next one. We're getting close. We're almost there, but not. We still got a little ways to go here. A little ways to go. Bear with me. Bear with me, but don't worry. It's a nice bear. It's not going to eat you. There is a bear with me, but it's a nice one. So now we're going to go back 10. We're going to go back 10. Okay, so if I'm over here, it's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 back. So that's going to be -1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, -6 modal half step, which would be -7 scale degrees if we had those, but we don't usually do that. We say if it's -10, 12 minus 10 is 2 forward. And 2 forward is a major second, therefore major second could be 2 forward or 10 back, but I'd rather call it an XA modal range, a 5-6 modal range, meaning -10 from the Mixolydian mode would be -6 modal half steps. Going forward would be a +2 from the Mixolydian mode. 7 minus 6 would be a +1 or 1st modal half step or 2nd scale degree. 2 note away major second. So if I go forward, it would be 2 notes away, which would be 1 modal half step forward, which would be the 2nd scale degree. Okay, Let's do the ones in the middle. Let's do the ones in the middle. You thought we were done, but not quite. Not quite done. Not quite done, because we have to do the one in the middle, all the ones in the middle. There's a bunch of them, but not too many. There's not too many. All right, so let's say we go -1 back. So if we go -1 back, so that's going to land us in the ocean. -1 back lands us in the Lydian Ocean this time. We're in the Lydian Ocean. So that's going to be then -1 step, and it's going to be -1 or 0.5 modal half steps backwards in this case, which you would think would be a -1.5 scale degrees. But we don't have scale degrees. Normally we say if it's -1 back, 12 minus 1 would be 11 forward. So 11 forward is a major 7. So a major 7 could be 11 forward or -1 backwards. I'd rather call it from the Mixolydian mode an x to an x minus, or a 5 to a 4.5, which has a distance in the counterclockwise direction of -1 from the Mixolydian mode, -0.5 modal half steps backwards, because then if I went forwards clockwise, it would be 11 steps forward from the Mixolydian mode. 7 minus 0.5 would be a 6.5 modal half steps forward. Here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. And if I go this way, it would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 and a half modal half steps forward. Okay. Let's keep it rolling. Keep it rolling. Don't stop it from rolling. I started rolling it on purpose. I want it to roll. Keep it rolling. Trying to stop the roll. So let's go -4. So if I go 1, 2, 3, 4, lands me in the Dorian Ocean. So that would be -1, 2 and a half modal half steps backwards, which you would think would be -3.5 scale degrees, but we don't have scale degrees. We would say if it's -4, then 12 minus 4 would be 8. So that would be an 8 note away minor 6, and therefore the minor 6 could be 8 forward or 4 backwards. But I'd rather call it something like an XP negative modal range, which would be a 5 to a 2.5 modal range, which if I'm going counterclockwise would be a -4 from the Mixolydian mode, -2.5 modal half steps, which means that if I go in the clockwise direction, it would be 8 notes away from the Mixolydian mode. 7 minus 2.5 would be a 4.5 modal half step forward, which you would think would be a 5.5 scale degree forward, but we have to round it up to 6 because they don't use 0.5s in that idea. So we're going to say from here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 lands me in the Dorian Ocean, or 1, 2, 3, 4 and a half modal half steps forward, which would be 5.5 scale degrees, but we have to just call it a 6, which is going to be a minor 6, right? Okay, so let's get rid of that one and this one, and so then we're going to go up again. So now we're on this one, so now we're going a 6 note away. Here's that weird one, 6 notes away. So if I go 6 notes away, it's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in the negative direction, lands me in the Ionian Ocean. We're in the Ionian Ocean. That would be a -1, 2, 3 and a half modal half steps back, which you would think would be -4.5 scale degrees, but we don't have negative scale degrees. So if I say it's -6, 12 minus 6 would be a positive 6. We usually call that a diminished fifth or an augmented fourth. And so that means a diminished fifth could be 6 forward or 6 backwards, basically. But I'd rather call it an XD negative modal range, or a 5 to a 1.5 modal range, which if I go counterclockwise would be a -6 notes away from the Mixolydian mode, a -3.5 modal half steps. If I went clockwise, therefore, it would be 6 going forward from the Mixolydian mode. 7 minus 3.5 would be 3.5 modal half steps going forward. So if I went forward, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lands me in the Ionian Ocean, or 1, 2, 3 and a half modal half steps forward, which you would think would be 4.5 scale degrees forward, but no, it's rounded up to 5 because we don't have halves when we look at the scale degrees the way the current system is. All right, let's go to the next one. We go up to this one. So we go -9 back. So from here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 lands me in the Aeolian Ocean. That's negative 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and a half modal half steps back, which you would think would be negative 6.5 scale degrees back, but we don't have scale degrees, so we normally say if it's negative 9, 12 minus 9 is positive 3. 3 forward would be a minor third, therefore minor third could be 3 forward or negative 9 backwards. I'd rather call it an xn negative modal range or a 5 to a 6.5 modal range. And the distance going counterclockwise would be a negative 9 notes from the Mixolydian mode, which would be negative 5.5 modal half steps back. The clockwise distance then would be 3 notes forward from the Mixolydian mode, which would be a 1.5 modal half steps forward, which you would think would be a 2.5 scale degree, but no, we have to round it to a 3 scale degree, 3 note away minor third. So in other words, if I went forward, 1, 2, 3, we land in the Aeolian Ocean, which is 1.5 modal half steps forward, which you would think would be 2.5 scale degrees, but no, we have to make it a third scale degree because we don't use the 0.5s on the scale degrees. All right, finally, we have the 10 note away. So if I go 10 back, it would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Wait a second, that doesn't land me in the ocean. We're doing ocean landings. 11 back. So what if I just move this? So we're gonna go 11 back. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Lands me in the Mixolydian Ocean. So that would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, negative 6.5 modal half steps backwards, which you would think would be negative 7 scale degrees backwards or negative 7.5 scale degrees, but we don't have negative scale degrees typically. So therefore, normally we would say if it's 11 backwards, 12 minus 11 would be 1 forward. 1 forward is a minor second. Therefore, the minor second could be 1 forward or negative 11 backwards. But I'd rather say it's an XA negative modal range, a 5 to a 5.5 modal range going counterclockwise. That would be a distance of a negative 11 notes from the Mixolydian mode, which would be a negative 6.5 modal half steps. If I went forward or clockwise, then it would be a 1 note away. 7 minus 6.5 would be 0.5 going forward, which you would think would be 1.5 scale degrees, but no, it's going to be 2, a 1 note away minor second, right? So if I went 1 forward, lands me in the Mixolydian Ocean, or it would be, of course, a 0.5 scale modal half step, which would be a 1.5 scale degree, which we don't have. Therefore, we round it up to a second scale degree. Whew. Oh, that's it. All right, let's go ahead and erase these, and we'll do the minors in a future presentation.